Okay, I'm going to hand the floor over to William, who helped put this presentation together.
Well, I've done nothing to actually pull the presentation together, but I will introduce Tim. Tim and I met at an advertising and design agency called Attic about 20 years ago. And if I remember right, Tim worked in the New York office, and I worked in the San Francisco office. I don't know if we ever worked on anything together. If so, it might have been AOL because I think we each worked on a piece of that business when AOL was actually a thing.
That kind of
Um,
dates us a little bit.
I know. Um, Tim and I left that agency around the same time and kept in touch the way you do with old work colleagues. And by that, I mean kind of off and on and sporadically. But over the years, and through the miracle of social media, I got to see Tim's photography work, which is consistently excellent. I think it's book quality. He does a lot of portraiture, but the photographs that always stand out to me are his wheels and steel work, particularly um, the League of Gentlemen. The League of Gentlemen. He doesn't just document the event; he brings you there. I can see it, I can hear it, I can smell it, I can taste it, and I feel like I know everyone in the photos. Um, I didn't speak with him prior to the meeting, so I don't even know if he's going to talk about that tonight. But either way, I look forward to hearing about more about Tim and his photography and his approach. So, Tim Scott.
Thank you.
Let's all mute too.
So the first thing I want to say is thank you, every single one of you, for taking the time to come and listen to somebody that you don't know talk about work that you've probably not seen. It was really nice of William to invite me. You know, we kind of share this love of art from our background working in the field of advertising and design and, always being in the chase of creative arts in one way, shape, or another. Honestly, one of the reasons that I got into photography again is because, I started in high school when I was very young, got into the world of advertising, and I was around photography all the time, worked with some of the best photographers in the world on projects and things, but I never shot. I loved watching. I'm an art director and creative director by trade. So being a part of that creative process and seeing how photographers worked and the quality of work that they could create and the quality of work that we were expected to create kind of made every other creative outlet daunting to me because I have this perfectionist bent that I'm incredibly hard on myself. And if I can't do something and constantly get better, I am very much my own worst enemy. Let me very quickly, I'll pull up the deck here, because I work in the creative field. I had to create something. Let me find it. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
So whenever somebody sees this is actually part of my logo. And when people see it, they always ask me, they're like, either you're a fan of Macy's or Heineken, or you just have a fetish for red stars. And I'm like, well, I just kind of have a fetish for stars. So that's kind of sets up a little bit what put me on my journey. As a kid, my parents were missionaries, so we grew up traveling all over the world. I grew up in the Philippines and Japan, and only moved back to the US when I graduated from high school and came back here to go to college. And part of that growing up meant I was incredibly painfully shy. So I was so shy, I wouldn't answer the telephone. I wouldn't talk to strangers. I was this tiny, bucktooth, geeky kid that just kind of preferred to be in the background. Sounds like a photographer. So part of that was I loved observing. I loved just kind of seeing how people interacted, looking at the world around me and kind of seeing what was happening and actually kind of making up my own stories as I saw people interacting and wondering what that story actually was. And I think in a way I was kind of creating my own mental snapshots of kind of things that would kind of influence me later. And that was a little bit of the beginning of kind of where my head began. After I left New York City, when was it, 2006, I was completely burned out, creatively, mentally, physically, almost a decade of pretty close to 90-hour weeks consistently in the rat race of the world of super high-end advertising had taken every ounce of kind of who I was and what I thought I was and what I was going to do with my life. And, I was thinking about completely getting out of the business, but it's kind of in my blood. I can't do that. But in order to do something creative, I thought, well, I used to make pictures. Maybe I should do that again. So I bought a little creative camera and I went out and I took a little digital camera and I went out and I took a lot of really bad pictures. And nothing to do with the camera. It's I didn't have a vision for kind of what it was. And so part of that process for me in trying to grow was when I learned it was film. I'm not a young person. We did the dark room, and I'm like, maybe the process will help me because I found myself just going and pushing the button to push the button, and there was really nothing to lose. So there wasn't much thought behind it. And this is strictly for me. And actually, before I go any farther, one of the things I do want to say is everything I'm talking about is completely my journey and my perspective. And one of the things I love about photography and creativity is there are absolutely no rules to what you do. And I think you're probably going to create your most satisfying work and output if you create based on something that inspires you, that challenges you, that interests you. And if you're just making pictures to make pictures or just making a painting to put ink on paper or whatever it is, it's going to be a much more difficult path to get there. And so for me, my photography is very selfish. I started out photographing for me. I am very fortunate in that I don't have to make my living doing this. I still work in the world of advertising, and that's what pays most of my bills. And I do this, and it's interesting because through the years, I'm going to keep going because I've got a lot of slides here. Through the years, people have started to approach me and ask me if they can license my work or run stories or to do things for them. And I'm incredibly protective of this because it's the one thing I have in my creative output in my personal life that I completely own. And it's not for sale and it's not something that I'm willing to give away, but it is something that I'm super passionate about and I love it. I am completely addicted to photography and creating. Scott Photo Co. was born on the idea that, and let me get back to the start. When I was a kid, I was so shy and I wouldn't talk to people, and so I didn't have a lot of friends. And I would literally sit in the backyard of my house or up on the roof, and I would stare up at the sky, and I would just pick a star and be like, "I wonder what that is." And stars kind of became my destination. Like if I could do anything, I could go here, I could do that. And so a star actually became something very important to me, kind of personifying with it. I even have tattoos of stars on me. And it's not really just, the star, it's kind of the idea of always reaching for something and never giving up no matter what's thrown your way. So that's kind of where it starts. Scott Photo Co. simply came about because Tim Scott photography sounded really dumpy and lumpy. So I just came up with something else. And there wasn't a reason for it. I'm just a marketing guy, so I had to have a title. A lot of what I shoot has become a lot of what I'm known for is motorsport photography. And that wasn't a super choice because, living in New York and places all over the world, the automotive stuff was not that important. In New York, I didn't own a car. When I moved to Oregon to recover from New York, a lot of my friends were into the automotive field and hot rods and everything else. So I kind of just fell into it by rote. And just because I was around it all the time and I was getting back into photography, I started focusing my lens on that. I took a lot of bad pictures. I still take a lot of bad pictures. Um, my hit rate is incredibly low and I shoot film and it's quite expensive, but I'm still really driven by it. But the challenge for me is if you look at a lot of automotive photography, to me, it feels so much the same. It's a picture of a car. And they're beautifully done. They're beautiful cars. They're beautiful locations. And I have this curse of having very short attention. I haven't been diagnosed, but I wouldn't be surprised if I had a touch of ADHD. And if I'm not always moving forward, if I'm not challenging some creative boundary, then I get bored very easily and I quit. It's a really bad personality quirk. So I started looking at automotive photography and what I could do that would be interesting to me. And I came across this picture that was made in 1912 on 4 by 5 film of a race car driving by. It was shot by a kid who I believe was 13 or 14 at the time. And of course, in his day, he's breaking every rule of photography because they're shooting on large format cameras with big film that had to be on tripods and you couldn't move, etc. And here he is experimenting with motion and movement and creating something. And this spoke to me. I'm like, if he could make something in 1912 that's inspiring, why can't I make something now? And that kind of started me on my journey of trying to find ways to photograph motorsports and hot rods and stuff in a way that I wasn't seeing all the time and in a way that inspired me. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to move quickly at this point. This is my wife and I shooting at my favorite place on earth. This is El Mirage Dry Lake Bed. There's something magic there. You've seen a ton of fashion photographs, just so much work is done out there. TV commercials are shot there. Herb Ritts shot there as his last photo shoot before he passed. It's just kind of a magical place with the dust and the sun and everything that's going on. And I was out there like an idiot, with my 8 by 10 Deerdorf camera taking pictures of hot rods. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. Why would you take pictures on large format film on a camera with a tripod? You're not going to get anything. And honestly, a lot of times I don't, but that's the challenge of it that I love. This is kind of an ethos that I love because I don't like necessarily telling a complete story. My goal with my photographs is to let people, and I was very flattered by what William said because I want to find some type of emotion or moment or feeling or something. I want people to feel a little bit of what I felt when I made the photograph. And that's really hard to do with a still photograph. Video, you can get a lot more information. Being there, you obviously have all the senses that you can use. I have one tool, and it's a still photograph, and I shoot 99.9% black and white film, so I don't even have color to help. So I love the abstractness of a photograph, but I also want to see if I can find a way to get some kind of emotion and something that tells the story of what it's like to be in that moment as I am there. This is the photograph that I made at about 10 minutes after that photo was snapped at El Mirage. So we have movement, we have people, we have a depth, we have something, shooting movement on a stationary 8 by 10 camera is interesting, but I did set this up because I wanted to see if I could do it. The photograph that you saw by Lartigue was actually photographed on a camera. Actually, you can see it behind me, just like that one. That's a 4 by 5 single lens reflex camera. You can hand hold it and you can make photographs that way. So you have that motion. And I shoot on that quite a bit. You'll see some work as we go through. This was on a stationary 8 by 10 camera, and I wanted to see if I could set something up and tell a little bit of a story. This was that experiment, and I'm very happy that it actually worked and I didn't waste $100 in film on a mistake. But I do. I waste a lot of film. I'm always pushing my own boundaries to see what is the next step for me? Because if I keep doing the same thing, I get bored and I won't keep doing it. That's something I know about myself. One of the things that I mentioned in the flyer that I look at everything as a portrait. Portraits are actually what inspire me the most and the first thing that drew me to photography because I love a good portrait. And when I say portrait in this terms, I'm going to talk initially about people and making photographs of people. The beauty and the amazing thing about photographing a person is every millisecond is different from the millisecond before or after. Every day is different. Every environment is different. Every movement is different. And you have this constant challenge to create something in a spontaneous second that hopefully will challenge someone to pay attention, to look for more than half a second, and that will inspire some kind of curiosity. I want people to be curious. I don't care if people like my work. I'm not trying to make everyone see what I see, but I would love to catch your attention and inspire you to think about something or to look at something maybe you hadn't looked at before. And that's always what I'm pushing myself to do. So even when I photograph a rock, when I photograph a car, when I photograph a flower, I think about it as a portrait because I'm not just taking a picture of something to show that. That's just not my style. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just I want to find a way to push that boundary and find a way to make something different to help you see it maybe in the way that I saw it at the moment or the way that I've come up with capturing that on film. So my approach to doing a portrait of a car is looking beyond the car and thinking what else is part of the story that's going to make this interesting beyond just that image of a car or a motorcycle, which I love, by the way. And we have a lot of just cars and motorcycles, but let's get going. Um, I just wanted to very quickly, before I start going through photos, talk a little bit about my inspiration. I kind of started out being inspired by photographers in the fashion world, but not the people. There are some that you would recognize. Paolo Roversi, some of these I don't know if you've heard of. Paolo Roversi is an amazing Italian photographer that just captures some kind of emotion and something that he has a connection with who he photographs that I've found very powerful. Sarah Moon is a very similar style, but hers is a little bit different. I've got examples of both of them coming up. Peter Lindbergh, Irving Penn, you all know. Richard Avedon, you all know. Herb Rich, you likely all know. Lillian Baseman. Patrick, I'm not going to butcher his last name. Lartigue, we talked about. Jesse Alexander is actually a automotive photographer from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. Klemansky, the same thing. Elliot Erwitt, many of you probably know. He recently passed away, and he's a phenomenal photographer. Michael Kenna from the landscape side of things. The one I didn't mention that I don't know how many of you will know is a photographer by the name of Dis Farmer. He is a really, really interesting photographer who was in the middle of nowhere making portraits in a small town. And somehow he managed to capture something special that other people were unable to find. So when you get a chance, look up the photographer Dis Farmer, and you'll either hate it or you'll love it. It's a little bit polarizing, but I think his work is actually really fascinating. Here's three examples from Paolo Roversi. You can see there's very much a style there, and you can tell it's also fashion driven. But the things that drew me to his work are the way he connects with his subjects. There's something in the way they look at him and they connect with his lens that is very powerful and engaging to me. And if you go back and kind of look at his body of work, he's a fashion photographer that doesn't really fit the mold of what everybody was doing at the time. And he has such a beautiful relationship with the people he works with and how he works with them that I was immediately attracted to his work. Happy birthday to Kate Moss, by the way. Today is her birthday. This is some of Sarah Moon's work, and you can see tonally and texturally, it's very similar to Paolo. But with her, she has a little bit more abstractism in it, the movement, the lack of actually seeing a person's face or the blur or things like that. And yet there's still a really beautiful, she's also a fashion photographer. And there's a beautiful story that she's brought into that in a very professional realm. And I find that incredible. So let me jump into a little bit because this is what I'm most well known for is shooting motorsports, just because that's what's been picked up and published more than a lot of my other work. It's something that I very much enjoy and I've learned to love, and I've made a ton of friends photographing this, and I really, really do enjoy it because it is a community. And that's what's fantastic about your group is being able to get together with friends and be inspired and be challenged by people around you. And I have a lot of friends who are photographers. It's a very competitive world in the motorsports, making photographs, and there's amazing photographers, and I'm inspired by them all the time. In fact, one of them is on the call today, Dan. He is an amazing photographer that shoots for magazines as well, and he's joined us from Indiana. Thanks for coming, Dan. So let me go a little bit into the motorsport realm. You saw this picture on the flyer, and I don't know why, but I love this photograph. It's abstract, it's got movement, it's timeless, it's blurry. And I think if you talk to a lot of my social media followers, they would say that I'm a fan of blurry pictures, and I most definitely am. But the key is it can't just be blurry. It's got to have enough of a definition that someone can take some kind of story from it. And I've always enjoyed this. This is something that I shot years and years and years ago, actually at the Race of Gentlemen that William was talking about. It was shot in the sand in Wildwood, New Jersey on a 35 millimeter camera on black and white film. And it's grainy and blurry, and I really like it. This kind of gets me a little bit into some of my other stuff. Like, how much information do you need in a frame to tell a story? Does it need to be busy? Does it need a lot of items? In the motorsports world, certain people are very well known by some of their aspects. And the gentleman in the car who sadly passed away in a motorcycle accident a few years ago was just known for wearing this hat. Everywhere he went, he wore the same hat. Everybody knew him. Super nice guy. And this was at a rainy event on Pismo Beach in California. And I saw this hat and I saw the car and I had my 4x5, actually, that camera right behind me. And I thought, what can I do to make a picture that will tell a story without being literal, that will let people kind of interpret it themselves? And this is kind of what I came back with. Some people will get it, other people will be like, that's horrible photography. And I'm sure it is on both realms, but it made me happy. This was actually shot at the same event. Very similar thing. How I love to make timeless photographs, but I'm not looking to fake vintage photographs. I don't know if that makes sense. So in this photo, every element is vintage, not because we planned it that way, but because this race called the Race of Gentlemen is actually based around recreating a race that used to happen in the 50s and 60s. Racing on the beach, the 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, just amazing things. So this was a race on the beach. People brought their old hot rods out and raced on the beach in the rain. They dressed period correct, and they just came out and had fun. I was literally walking by, and I saw her sitting in the car. And by the time I got my metering, got my camera set up, and I was looking at it, this gentleman walked by. I have no idea why she was laughing, and I pushed the shutter, and it was a gift. There's just something beautiful and emotional about this that I will love for a long, long time. Now, these are the type of photographs that on social media get all the likes and all this is wonderful and all the follows because they're photographs of cars and they're nice photographs of cars, right? And I like them. I don't dislike them. I made these, let me think, the one on the left was actually at Bonneville a couple of years ago when it completely rained out, and that's what we call Lake Bonneville because it completely flooded. The middle one was shot at El Mirage on a Sunday morning, bright just after sunrise. And the one on the right was actually also shot at El Mirage. I shoot quite a bit at El Mirage. It's about an hour from my house. And it's a beautiful picture of a car, which I enjoy. And I like these. And these are the things that you would expect to see more and more on things. So my goal is on top of making photographs like this, I want to push that boundary and find ways to tell a story in a little bit different idea. This is another straightforward picture of a car. This was shot on, again, a 4x5 camera behind me. And this is probably one of my most popular car photographs that I have made because it's very straightforward. It's a beautiful car made by a well-known hot rod shop. It's moody, it's black and white, and they really like it. And I like it as well. But how do I take it a step farther? So this is a photo shoot. This is actually for a magazine that's coming out. It's at the publishers right now called Hop Up Magazine. And it was during that week of Bonneville when we were out there, and it rained and rained and rained, and we were stuck in the hotel because Bonneville was rained out, and I had to come up with something to photograph. And I knew this guy, and his car was really cool. And the only place that I could photograph was in the garage because it was raining everywhere else. And I'm trying to figure out ways because this car is very photographed. It's a beautiful, super cool, historic car. So I just did some scouting and I walked around. And the first photograph, the reason I loved it is I like the architectural elements that kind of changed it from just being about the car, but yet everything leads you to the car. So it gave you something to look at. Now, photographing this, if you look straight down in front of the car, it's actually a down ramp that takes you to the floor below. And I'm standing on the ramp above it, shooting across that expanse. So then I had him pull the car up. So I was literally looking straight down on the car, kind of drone-esque, to make a car from a perspective that almost no one sees unless you're a drone or something like that. You're getting more and more. Just because I wanted something a little bit different. I wanted people to see something that perhaps they hadn't seen before. I love doing that stuff. Just something odd and weird. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is the same car in one of my infamous blurry pictures. You've got a sense of what the car looks like. Now, to me, you can see a car sitting still all the time, but cars are meant to have motion. They're meant to be driven. The appeal of hot rodding is going fast and doing things and things that feel scary. In fact, hot rodding was kind of built from that. Military veterans coming back from the war that needed the excitement that they had would buy hot rods and motorcycles and drive them fast and do crazy things. And this kind of whole thing was born from the excitement of speed and danger. And so representing these cars in a way that kind of communicated what it felt like is to me kind of part of the story of what hot rodding is. This is different. This is not a hot rod, but this is me experimenting again. I went up to, I don't know if you guys remember Sears Point. It's no longer Sears Point. It's up in Sonoma, and it's a famous racing track up there where many, many, many races have been held over the years. And, I was photographing Porsches and Ferraris and Mercedes and everything on a track that I wasn't that familiar with, but I wanted to push myself to photograph something that was out of my comfort zone in a location that I had not photographed and try to find a way to create something that interested me. So this was not commissioned. I pay for everything myself and I do it. And one of the things I found is 9 times out of 10, when you see a photograph of a beautiful Porsche like this, historic, I believe it's a 917, but I could be wrong. It's just a close-up shot of the car on the track, and it's a really cool shot. But I wanted more than that, and it was a beautiful countryside. And I literally walked around for probably half an hour looking for an angle that would give me something to lead to this. So finding something that had the track behind it and the movement and the way that the light was hitting it took a long time to get. And I just sat there for probably 20 minutes and blew 4 or 5 rolls of 35 millimeter, just photographing the cars coming over that hill because there was something kind of cool and magical to me. This was another experiment, and while it looks very similar to the more straightforward car photographs, one of the things that I'm pushing myself to do is not just think in 2 dimensions, but think in 3 dimensions. So how can I take a 2D photograph and add a depth to it that encourages the viewer to look beyond just an initial subject? So in the first one, I was hanging out of the back of a pickup truck and we were driving through a park in Nevada. And we were kind of directing the hot rods to kind of move different places and do different things and photograph. And I was trying to find a way to kind of show where we were, but have a focus on one central perspective and yet kind of have everything be seen, but lead your viewer. This was the art director in me. How do I art direct this so that I can have you look at what I want you to look at? So generally, the first thing that you're going to look at is one of the brightest areas of whatever it is you're looking at. The white car is obviously one of the brightest things and the sky above it. So it leads your eye that way. Using depth of field. So that focal point is straight on that car. And it's kind of hard to see on a small screen, but the front cars are slightly out of focus. So it kind of leads you that way and kind of gives you a different depth to it. And it felt more to me like I was there because that's how I saw it. The second image, I was literally making just a straightforward car photo because I thought it was cool. We were in the desert, again, somewhere in Nevada somewhere. And I was setting up to do it, and I saw the car, the second car, coming up the dirt road quite quickly because it's a hot rod and he likes to drive fast. And I thought, I need that car in the background just to give it something so it's just not another picture of a car sitting in a field. And so as quick as I could, I shot the picture and I got lucky in that it was kind of in the right spot to do that. And it just, again, gave it that dimension that made me happy. The third shot was, again, how do I take a photograph? You'll see this Babe Stapp car in a few different photographs. This was at El Mirage. The guy who owns it's a friend of mine, and I asked him if I could photograph it, and we were out there shooting. And the car behind it, I was actually driving that day. And I had this in my head. How do I add dimension? How do I add something that makes it feel deeper? And so all I did was I took the other car and I took it farther back and I just kind of tried to find ways to add a dimension to it that was not there if you're just going to make a photograph of a car. This is what I'm always doing. I'm a pain in my own butt in that I'm always challenging myself because once I've done it, I feel like it's done. So how can I push and do something a little bit different? So back to movement. So to me, telling the story of movement in motorsports is important because, cars are beautiful, but they're meant to move. So telling that story is the obvious way is using blur. It's an inexact science, trying to find a way to do that. Here's two that I happened to get that I really liked. I don't mind if the subject, one of the things in traditional automotive photography is if your subject is not perfectly sharp, then it's a failure. And for me, I don't care. I don't care if it's perfectly sharp. It has to be sharp enough that you understand what the story is I'm telling. That's as sharp as it needs to be for me. So in fact, if it's too sharp, it almost seems photoshopped anymore. I have nothing against Photoshop. I just like the personal challenge of finding ways to do it in camera. So here we have the motion. I love the fact that the motorcycle picture is actually off kilter. So it's not perfectly level. Um, with my attention deficit and my perfectionism, my first reaction is to make everything balanced and perfect and work. So the idea of letting things that are imperfect into it actually really appeal to me because in the world of advertising, everything has to be perfect. There is no perfect in reality. So finding ways to keep things that feel human and imperfect, I don't know if that's the right word, but it just makes it feel like it's human. And I feel like in so much that's going on in the world today, we're being pushed and pushed and pushed into perceived perfection and run by computers and artificial intelligence. And again, it's just tools. It's the way the world is. But for me personally, what I create, I want a human element that feels real. And part of that is why I shoot mostly film, because in my eyes, film, for some reason, the imperfection of it, the challenge of it, the grain, it just feels a little bit more human and real to me. And that's not a judgment. That's not me saying film is better than anything else. It absolutely isn't. And to be 100% transparent, the photograph on the left is film, the photograph on the right is digital. It takes me way longer to make a digital picture look like film than it does for me to have a film picture that I'm happy with. But there's just something about it. And I'm getting closer and I will make it work. And digital is a fantastic tool for shooting moving photographs because you have a lot more options and you can get stuff a lot quicker. Off kilter. So this was at the beach at the Race of Gentlemen. And when I'm shooting film, I have no idea what I'm getting until weeks later when I process my film. And every once in a while, a shot like this will come out and I fall in love with it because it's so weird. Like there's just something about it that makes me want to look at it again and again. And at first, I didn't even notice the flag girl on the left side. And you kind of focus on the motorcycle and the action on the beach. And this kind of thing just makes me chuckle a little bit because technically it's kind of an accident and a mistake. But to me, that's probably 80% of what photography is being prepared for whatever's going to happen and finding a way to capture it in a way that inspires you. This I loved because it's just weird. There's the human stories. I love the people in the photographs. I'm not trying to take everything modern out of the photographs. For example, if you look in the background, there's a guy taking a picture with his phone. And a lot of my other pictures, I have people dressed in normal clothes because while they may not be historic now, 25, 50, 100 years from now, these are our history. And I hope that people look at it and say, oh, I remember in 20 whatever, and we dressed like that, and we had those phones that were so huge, and now they're embedded in our brain, or whatever it is. They're going to have some meaning to people in the future. So it doesn't have to be fake historic. I do want timeless, but they don't have to be fake vintage or historic. So we've got the blurry part down. So now that I've done blur, I'm like, I really like it, but now how do I push both of those into different realms to tell the same story? The photograph on the right, I wanted to use blur, but I wanted to change perspective. So this was at the starting line of a race. So I laid down on my belly. And I don't know if any of you have seen this before or tried this, but laying on your belly and trying to pan when a car is going by you anywhere between 20 and 60 miles an hour makes you look like a complete idiot. So I'm laying on the grass, a middle-aged guy, trying to move my camera and get these pictures, and people probably thought I was completely crazy. And I didn't know what would come out because I'd never done it before. And I knew they were going to be weird and abstract, but I'm like, I have nothing to lose. So I made that. And that one actually worked, and I was very happy with it. But that's one out of maybe, I don't know, 100 that I shot. That one is also digital. The one on the left, I wanted to try something completely different. How can I tell action and a story of movement with a very still photograph and a high shutter speed? So this was at a race in Riverside early last year. and it was on a dirt track. So there was dirt flying, there was physics of people going around sharp corners. It was a cool background with the lollipop trees in the back. So I planted myself on a corner and I tried to catch a moment when you could see the dirt actually coming up off of the tires and you could see the driver leaning into it. So it kind of communicated the idea of movement because why else are you going to lean like that unless you're crazy or you're faking it? And how is the dirt kind of coming up off those? And if you blow this up and you put it on a big print, and I'm a print guy, I love print, then you can see the pieces of dirt flying off the wheels. And I don't know, there's just something that was interesting to me. So I played a whole day just doing that, and I had a good time doing it. So you can see a pattern here. It's just me always pushing my own boundaries and trying to find ways to make it work. This is another one, just kind of stepping out. Why does the car need to be completely in the photograph? Why can't it just be the story of the car going by and the dirt flying on it in the middle of a race? This made me happy because it's weird. I like weird. My wife likes weird. She married me. Now, this was another experiment in trying to do how do I take a three-dimensional story and almost try and make it feel like a movie scene? Like, how can I make it feel like a clip? So in the first one, again, this is another one of the races from some of the other pictures, and it's got different dimensions. If you stop and look at it, you've got vehicles and people watching. You've got a car on the starting line. You've got the flag guy in the very front, and you've got this kind of dimension and this light kind of blurring everything out. It felt a little bit theatrical to me. The second one, this was actually shot in England at a race called Goodwood, and they were pushing this historic car up the road. I have no idea what they were thinking or what they were doing, but looking at it, I don't even like to explain it because I always wonder, what are they thinking? Why are they doing it? Why is the guy in the front looking off in the distance? It feels a little bit like a movie. The one on the right, I think to me feels more like a movie moment than anything because it's like this guy sitting in his car, all these people standing behind him, and he looks a little bit daft. I wonder what he thinks and what's happening. And so while all of these are not like, oh, this is the best picture I ever took, there's something in it that inspires me to kind of look deeper and see if I can find these moments in other things that I'm making photographs of. Then we have very straightforward ones. You know, as an art director and designer, I love graphicness. I love shapes. I love tones. This is actually one of the most amazing motorcycle builders in the world. His name is Shinya Kimura, and he's a friend of mine. He lives here in Southern California, and he is an artist in every sense of the word. And he also loves to race. So everything that he builds, he will take to El Mirage and Bonneville and race, and he pushes them hard. And I was standing at the starting line one day and I was just kind of watching. And I always wonder, because I'm not a racer, I'm not that brave, I'm not that proud. I like to take the pictures of him. And I always wonder what they're thinking right before the person tells them they can go down here to go as fast as they want. Are they thinking, I can die? Are they thinking, how fast can I go? Are they thinking, what's going to happen? I don't know what they think. So I always wondered, I'm always standing there. And so I had my 4x5 camera and I'm there in front of him and I shot down low and I saw him do this and I hit the shutter. And, you know, I always wonder what he thinks. Is he praying? Is he looking at the engine to wonder if anything's going to go wrong? I don't know, but there was something really strong and graphic to it for me. Now, if you want to go super abstract, this is like the blurry one that's up on the wall behind me, where it's just kind of like there's no real specific subject. This was at El Mirage. The sun was going down. It was completely dusty. The guys were just crazy. They were just flying around in their hot rods because they could. It was wide open. It was dusty. And I was literally just shooting with my 35 millimeter film camera and just kind of trying to get whatever I could get just to play. And this came out and it makes me feel like I was there again. Like you can see the dust in the air, the lights going down. John is flying by, almost killing me, and has a huge grin on his face afterwards because that's what he wanted to do is scare the bejesus out of me. So there's something to me about this photo that I love. I don't know if other people love it, but again, this is my selfish part of photography. This is what inspires me to keep going. This is one where I'm photographing a race and I'm bored. I'm like, I've made this photograph 100 times. I make photograph of a car taking off from the line and this happens and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, what can I photograph that tells the story of what's happening without showing the expected thing? And I probably stood there for 20 minutes just watching cars take off. And the thing that I noticed was the dust that came up off their wheels every time that they took off. So I'm like, will it work if I photograph the dirt? I have no idea. So all I started doing is taking a look at the dirt and trying to figure out in the frame where I could get dirt showing and still have the car so you knew what it was from, still have enough depth to it so that you would see that something was happening and it would have a context. So this is a very unorthodox automotive shot, and I never thought it would get used for anything. But it was printed as the lead image for a photographic story that was picked up by a magazine in England, and it was the lead photograph. And I was completely shocked. It's black and white, it's blurry, and it's off kilter. And for some reason, a magazine picked it up. And I didn't shoot it for them. I just photographed it because I liked it. But again, I learned, how do I tell the story about something without focusing on what everyone expects me to look at? This is what happens when you completely miss the photograph. And this happens hundreds of times. This is not a photograph I keep, but I was going through my images and I saw this. And people look at my work and they're like, "Well, how did you get that? You're so good at doing this." And I'm not. I'm lucky like everybody else. And I have way more of these than I do of the shots that we just saw because I'm always trying to push and find a way to get it. So this is, photography so much as luck and being prepared. This is me just completely missing the shot because I'm shooting with an old Hasselblad, trying to catch a car moving very quickly close to me. Now, other times you get really lucky. This photograph, I was standing at the end of a race, and I was just kind of trying to find a way to tell the story of a car at the end of a race that looked cool. And I just stood there and stood there because it looked the same over and over and over. And then I noticed this is actually the same car that you saw earlier. I knew this guy, Tom. And about halfway down the track, and they go through this track in maybe 10, 15 seconds. I see this thumb come up out of the top of the car, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And it took me a second to realize what was going on. He's the nicest guy, and he's just like having fun with everybody, and he knows he's leading. So he puts his thumb, and I'm like, I have to find a way to capture this. So I quickly whipped up my camera, and I pushed the shutter, hoping to get something, and I was blessed by the photo gods. I don't know how I got this. I didn't plan to take it. This was luck. But the saying is luck favors the prepared. I was there. I was ready. I had my focus point all set. Framing pretty much set, and I got lucky. And I'll take luck any day. 99% of the time when I see my work, this is what I think. This was actually the hood ornament for a car that I photographed for another story. Okay, black and white. Can I shoot color? Yes. The reason I choose to shoot black and white is I really believe that you look at black and white and color very different. Personally, I tend to visualize in black and white because I shoot it so much. But black and white can't tell every story. Sometimes color is part of the story. And if color is an important part of the story, then I want to have that element in there to communicate better what I'm trying to get. I see in tones and shades when I look at things. So I believe in the human eye. When you look at a black and white photograph, you tend to look at it as an overall thing. You'll find your eye will start at the lightest area and kind of move through it depending on what the subject matter is. When you have a color photograph, most of the time your eye focuses on the color and less the subject matter. And I'm completely making this up based on my experiences. No one else, there's no scientific whatever to this. I'm making this up, but this is my experience. So color to me has to have a purpose, and I want you to see that color and I want you to experience it. So if I'm trying to get you to feel the emotion of the moment I'm in, that color has got to have a reason for it. So here's an example. This was a car that I photographed at El Mirage. El Mirage is known for its light. This is actually a story that's coming out next month in a magazine in Italy. And this car was hand built by a person in Europe. And just the story of it is fantastic. And it's incredibly personal. They sold everything they had and moved to the US. And this was about all they had. And they started over. And he is so proud of this hand built car, the color of it, and how hard they worked and what they sacrificed for the American dream. And it all was part of the story that was important. So I had to shoot some color. And it really works in this. There's something to it. The color tells the story of this vehicle. This is another one. You saw this one in black and white. So I had been planning to shoot this car for months, and I didn't have a lot of time to do it. So there was a race coming up at El Mirage, and I told the owner to call me because I wanted to come out at sunrise and make a photograph of the car on the dry lake bed. So it's dark 30 and I'm driving out there and he calls me and he's like, we have to cancel the shoot. I'm like, I'm halfway there. We can't cancel. He's like, El Mirage is super dusty, it's super windy, and it blew up all this dust, and you can't see anything, and it's not going to be any good. And I'm like, no way. I love bad conditions to try and find an image to shoot. I'm like, I'm halfway there. Let's just find a way to do it. So sure enough, behind us is a very typical El Mirage scene. The mountains, the sun is coming up in the background, but because all the dust had blown around, it just gave this gigantic softbox effect to everything. And it allowed things to come through like the God rays and the color and the richness of it. And it gave me something that was just completely a gift. You're 99.9% of the time not going to be able to get this photograph at El Mirage. So this was a gift. The color of the morning, it needed color. So that was one of the reasons I shot one 4x5 color sheet of film. This is completely opposite. This is at Bonneville. So the coldness of it looks like ice. It's salt. There was a huge rainstorm coming in. It was just before the lake bed completely flooded. The color of the car, they were all part of the story. This is also at El Mirage. Again, part of the story. The sun going down, the people in the photograph, how it felt to be there. Without color in this particular series, you wouldn't have the feeling that I felt when I was there making these photographs. So I needed the color to help tell the story. But most of the time, would they work in black and white? They would, but I don't think they would be as strong as what I have been able to end up with. Okay, you'd be glad to know if you don't like cars, we're through the car part. I'm talking quick because I have a lot of slides, so I don't want to go over time. Making photographs of people. This is my absolute favorite thing to do. I love people. I love faces. I love stories. I love photographing the same people over and over. And it's just so different what you can get and finding ways to interact with them. Being an introvert, it's really difficult because a lot of ways to finding photograph people and get interesting things is the interaction process and the relationship that you can build in a really short fashion. Or sometimes it's just a snapshot. You just don't know. So I'm going to cover both bases. When I got back into photography, I kind of started in the portrait realm. And of course, everybody's afraid of shooting with strobes or in a studio or anything else. So of course, I started just making photos of friends outside. Then I'm like, I'm going to find a way to shoot things in a studio because I was inspired by Avedon and other people that had the control of everything and the photographs they got. So I made myself a little tiny studio in my man cave in Bend, Oregon, and invited people over to make photographs. And I shot until I started getting things that I liked, the light that I liked, the expressions I liked, etc. I've always loved this photograph. This is Richard Avedon. I did not make this picture. I'm not quite that old. But to me, there's a beauty to it in its humanness. I'm sure Marilyn hated this photograph because it doesn't show her at her most glamorous and most beautiful. But to me, I was incredibly inspired by it because, here's this person that is expected to be completely perfect and seen a certain way all the time. And here she is in a moment unaware. And it was a gift to the photographer. And there's something so beautiful and pure in it that it inspires me a lot in the things that I photograph. And I show it to you because one of my favorite photographs I've ever made is this one. This is actually my sister-in-law a couple of years ago, and she came down to visit us and she was going through a divorce, and it was a very sensitive, emotional time. And for one thing, I felt really bad asking to make a picture, but at the same time, there was something about the memory of this time that needed to be captured. So I had my 8 by 10 studio camera sitting here in my house. I got one light, I put her by a window, and I gave her no direction. I said, I just want you to feel whatever it is that you're feeling and look into the camera. And she gave me this. And I find it amazingly beautiful, not only because I know her and I know how beautiful a soul she is, but being able to share something so intensely personal without words that other people can see and experience. I was scared to death to show this to anyone because I didn't want her to feel like it was a side of her that she would be ashamed of. So I had to send it to her and ask her permission to share it because it is a very personal photograph. And she wrote me back a couple of days later while I was sweating bullets and said, I've come to love it because it's a time in my life that I'll always remember. and I will never forget because it's something that I have to grow through and I will come out of the other side better. And we've agreed to make a follow-up on it next time she's down with where she is now. But to me, there's something, in fact, I do a series called Beautifully Human. It's so beautifully human in its emotion and detail. This is just 8 by 10 black and white film. This is part of another series that I was doing in the studio. How do I take these photographs of people and show them in very different ways? I like the emotion of it. I like the imperfectness. I like to show people with different things. This is very different. This was part of my Beautifully Human series where I actually put a call out for people that wanted to share something with the world that was not widely known that they were very proud of. And for this woman, she was Native American and middle-aged in professional standards and was struggling to kind of make her voice heard. So I wanted to make sure that we showed her strong, and I also wanted to make sure that we could show her as a human and the soft side of her as well. So we shot quite a bit, and both of these, actually the one on the right ended up in a portrait gallery competition. And I don't know, I think they're both beautiful. She's wonderful, and I enjoyed these. This is another series. This guy is actually a model. You may have seen him on America's Next Top Model years and years ago. And it was one of the calls that I just put out because we wanted to make photographs. It was a bunch of friends at my house. And we put a call out and he answered and came to the house and we just sat out in the front yard and shot. This is medium format film and he just had such piercing. His eyes are actually blue. And since it's black and white, they almost show as clear because that's how blue photographs on film. So it brought such an intensity and I wanted to capture that and see the different layers to him as a human, from the impish to the strong and bold to the kind of the in between. I love this stuff. It's so fun to photograph. Does a photograph have to be sharp to be effective? You can argue that till you're blue in the face with somebody. To me, I don't think so. I look at this and I feel like I know her. This is Xenia. I photographed her years and years ago on large format. And I had maybe 20 seconds with her. And she came up to the camera. She gave me this look. I made one photograph and it was blurry and out of focus. And when I first saw the film, I was really angry at myself because I'm like, I totally screwed this up. But then the more I lived with it, I'm like, there's a beauty to it. It actually reminded me quite a bit of like something that Paolo Reversi or someone would do because it felt different and abstract, but still beautiful to me. This is more straightforward, another person. So this was part of the Beautifully Human series when I was working on kind of learning studio lighting and detail. And, you look at this guy and you're like, he's a model and blah, blah, blah. But the interesting story with him and the reason that he felt not seen and struggled was because he was a gay man from North Carolina who came to California and was struggling to make it. And everything was kind of based on his look. And so everything we photographed had to have this look that he wanted the world to see. And photographing men as a man, is that a challenge? It is because, we look at people very differently. And finding a way to find his presence and his masculinity and his beauty was a challenge. And the way he made contact with his eyes, the way he presented himself was it was a fun shoot as well. Then we get back a little bit more into the darker side of things. These were two more people in the Beautifully Human series. The woman on the right had had a very, very difficult childhood. And when we sat down and talked, she was very meek, very quiet, very kind, and still very strong. But, the thing that she went through when she got into difficult times is she was a cutter. And you could see her scars on her arms. All of us have scars. Some of us just wear them on the outside. And with her, when she came in, she was completely covered up. She's like, I don't like people to see my scars. And I know that's why we're here, but it's intensely personal for me. So I'm like, we're not going to do anything to push you out of your comfort zone and whatever you give me. And you have permission to shout anything down. Nobody sees any film until you approve it. So to me, this was one of my favorites because it showed both her strength and her struggle. And it was a gift. The gentleman on the right was a immigrant. He had come over, I don't remember what country he was from, but on his way over, he came through France and he was kidnapped and abused and was stuck in France for a couple of years. And he finally made it to America and was finding his way and trying to figure out who he was. But there was this dark, deep I don't even know what the word is to him. And somehow this photograph kind of shared what I felt when I spent time with him. And he liked it as well. We have some other ones where he's much more, excuse me, direct and involved, but this was actually one of the favorites for both of us. Now, I don't always just want to shoot moody pictures. I do like it when people are smiling and having a good time, but I hate fake smiles. I hate setup things. So I have to be, when I'm doing these kind of photographs, I'm generally having conversations with them. We're talking. I'm not saying smile at the camera or do something funny. We're just kind of going on this journey and I'm waiting for the moment when they're giving something. The young woman on the left is actually very much a groupie and would follow people all over the world for their bands. And she was obviously a big fan of Mick Jagger and a lot of other bands and would just had this spicy wit that was really fun. The young woman on the right was actually a student of my wife. She is a university theater professor, and she was a young theater student and very theatrical. So, how do you get this kind of effervescence of a human being in a way that's true to them without posing it? And this was a moment that she gave to my camera as well. So I like the joy as much as I like the darkness. But to me, as humans, I think we spend a lot more time not smiling than we do smiling. It's this normal state of just being human. We like being in turn times of joy, but that other side is also part of it. Without sadness, we can't have happiness. Without the middle, we can't have anything else. So I like finding both sides of that spectrum. This is kind of both sides of that spectrum. This is another young actor. We were having a conversation sitting on the stairs. He was very talkative and interesting. So I liked this moment of him talking, not even looking at me. The one on the right is another one directly inspired by someone like Apollo Roversi, looking straight at the camera with kind of the darkness and everything else. That connection in the eyes was just really powerful to me. So I liked the contrast of both of these. This was a very good friend of mine. Now, this is an interesting thing for me because I think it's way more difficult to photograph someone that you know well than it is to photograph a stranger. Because to me, photographing someone you know well, you're trying to put all these things that you know about them into one photograph. It's like designing a logo for a client. They want everything that their company or what they believe stands in one little tiny mark that people can get that whole story in. And it's almost impossible, and you end up creating something really horrible most of the time. I think it's the same in a photograph. There's only so much you can put into a single moment. And if you try to put too much, you're going to miss all of it. So this was two moments, This was Tracy being Tracy and being goofy when we're making photographs. This was one of the first shots of the day out in front of our condominium in Palm Springs. It was 115 degrees that day. And so we ended up going over to the pool and getting in the pool. I don't know if many of you are fans of Herb Ritts, but this is very, very much inspired by Herb Ritts, the photograph on the right. Just the way that he saw beauty and women. And again, I didn't set these up. She was in the pool. She swam up. She looked really interesting. So I just asked her to put her arms up and look in the camera. We made a couple of photographs. So they're more traditional, but I still like the strength of them. And she likes them very much too, because this was probably 15 years ago now. So she's like, I like how I used to look. And I'm like, let's reshoot. You're every bit as beautiful now as you always were. Again, back to two different things. The woman on the left is my wife. I find her incredibly beautiful. She's an amazing human being. She is a saint. This was a photograph from one of the days when I had about 15 large format lenses. And I said, honey, can you be my subject for a lens test? Because every single one of these lenses is different. All I need you to do is sit there and I'm going to make pictures of you. And she rolls her eyes, but she does it for me. So she sat there for probably 3 hours as I just changed lenses and film and we shot. And this picture somehow came up very beautiful to me because she's the most kind, thoughtful, gentle human being I've ever known. And yet she's incredibly strong. And everybody thinks that she's so soft because, they can push her around or whatever because she's so kind. But there's a strength to her that even she doesn't see. And when she saw this picture, she actually cried and she's like, that's a side of me that I want to be, but I don't think anybody sees. And that to me is just, that's why I make photographs. I absolutely loved it. The woman on the right was just a play around in the park to see if I can photograph a stranger. And again, it's the eyes. How do you get that connection with a person in a way? She was a stranger, This is a gift from a stranger. I'm not trying to make you something that you're not. I'm not trying to do something that's going to make you who you aren't. This is my niece, two different shots. I'm going to have to talk faster because I'm sure I'm getting close to time. Same thing, studio shots. If you could see it on a big screen, this was playing the photograph on the left was made with 3200 speed film. It's super grainy, no flash. It's just a um, focusing light. The one on the right is a little bit more traditional. These I call mug shots. Are these beautiful portraits? To me, yes. I love the connection. I love the fact that they're kind of blank, and yet there's something there that draws me to them, and I think it's the eyes. These were two actors. We had done a shoot for my wife for a theatrical production, and I asked them if they would, mind just doing a quick portrait, and we shot 5x7 film. And I don't know. I'm drawn to them for a reason. Many people don't like them, but I still do. They inspire me. This is a series that I've been working on for a while called Legends Passing. So in the motorsports world, the heyday of the motorsports world was really the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when people would race, with almost no safety gear on tracks and people would die. And it was crazy the stuff that these people did. Way more brave and whatever than I will ever be. But, these people are now in their 70s and 80s and 90s and they're disappearing. They're going away. I was invited to a funeral a couple of years ago for someone, and when I went, I was just shocked at like how many good photographs. There was no real portraits of these people. And I'm always looking for a new portrait project. I'm like, I should make portraits of these guys before they pass away. So I have made it a point to set up a booth at an event that happens here in Southern California every year, and I've done it 3 years now. And these drivers that had their heyday back then will come and they're kind enough to sit in my booth, give me 10 minutes to shoot a roll of film, and these are some of the portraits that I have made with them. This is actually a gentleman who just passed away. He was 103 years old and one of the most legendary people in the history of hot rodding. His name is Alex Exidius. He had so much influence on the world of hot rodding that he's literally a legend. And I had been trying for a year, maybe two, to find a way to make a portrait with him. He's very self-conscious. He's a photographer also. He was well known for making photographs and films in his day. And he was 103. And it's like you just don't know when they're going to go. So it was probably 4 months ago. A friend of mine finally helped me pin him down, and we got him out. I showed him a photograph that I had made of another friend of his, and he loved it. So he agreed to sit for a portrait for me. So we met, and I had probably 2 hours. And this was one of the shots that I got. And there's just something magical in his eyes that I fell in love with this shot because to me, it feels like he still has something to say. He's 103. He's vibrant. He was intelligent. He still had this wit about him that was amazing. And trying to get that in a piece of film was actually a real challenge. And not many people have actually seen this image yet, but I'm very proud of it. And it took a lot of time and effort to get there. This is just a series of the guys from Legends that I photographed. And old men have great faces, and I love photographing them. And I think I'm getting there myself. But these guys are both legends and challenging because, they're used to being seen a certain way. They have to be cool. They have to be this image that they have. But I'm still trying to find a way to make a portrait of them that's going to stand the test of time. It can't be dated. It can't be something that's just going to seem flippant. And trying to make them happy is a scary thing because they're very opinionated, strong individuals with amazing stories. And I don't give them a choice on the image. When I go through my film, I choose an image from that day, and that's what they get. And what's awesome now is whenever I go out to shoot now, they're always asking to come and have their portrait made. So I take that as a huge compliment. This is the gentleman that I mentioned on the series earlier, where I had the gentleman on his motorcycle looking down Shinya Kimura. Again, one of the most amazing artists in the motorcycle realm that you will ever meet. A kind, humble, gentle man, and I wanted to find a way to get his portrait. Now we're on to a little bit more snapshotty things. These are things that I shot as we were going. So this is outside. These were not posed. These were not set up, but I love the faces, so I made a quick photograph. Same kind of feel to them as the other ones, the studio ones. I like that moment. This is another one when I'm out walking around during the races. I see faces that I love, and I'm like, can I make your portrait? As a introvert, it scares the dickens out of me to do so, but the more good photos I get, the more empowered I feel to do it. I know this says David. Her name is obviously not David. It's Karen. And I saw her, and there was just something magical in her presence, and I had to make her photograph. And I loved this is one of the images that I love from doing this project. These are random strangers that I came across at events. Finding couples is always kind of interesting to me. I don't care if you're gay, straight, whatever you are, just this kind of dynamic. One of the things that I like to do, and I actually did this with the photograph on the right, is I'll put them up on social media later and I'll ask if anybody knows them. And I've actually found every time that I've posted one, and I ask them what the story is from the image. And the stories are really fascinating because, this was a couple, they were together at the time and they broke up 2 weeks later. But this was like a story of them for that moment. And it was like both good and bad. And there's just, I don't know, there's something really cool in that moment. Is this a portrait? I don't know. It's my puppy. I had to put it in there because he's awesome. How much time do I have? Because I don't want to go over.
I mean, we're pretty close, but
Okay. I'll
go.
go really quick. And if I run out
Okay,
of time, let me know.
no problem.
So, as a photographer, I feel stale very quickly. If I'm doing the same thing over and over and over, I get in a comfort zone. And that comfort zone is death to creative to me. So I'm always trying to photograph things that I'm uncomfortable with or trying to see things in a different way. So when I have a down day, when it's raining, when I can't go anywhere, I will just set up random things and make photographs just to see what they look like. Like Gary Winograd said, I photograph to see what the world looks like in photographs. Because sometimes you photograph something, it looks totally different than you expect it to look because it looks different on film or however you're doing it. So one day I'm sitting here bored. My wife had this beat sitting there, and I'm like, what if I photographed it in black and white? What if I did it on a white background or a dark background? How does it look different? How do I light it? How do I change things? So I have these two random pictures of a beat. I kind of like them, but they do influence me. So, how does something with this kind of contrast look on a dark background? How does it look on a white background? How do I see it differently? What do I prefer? What gives me the most detail? This is all kind of loading into my creative data bank of how I want to photograph things. How do you photograph shiny things in a way that kind of interesting? How can I get so much detail in something and yet still have it be soft? Again, just an experiment of something. This kind of subject has been photographed 10 billion times by people all over the planet, but I haven't done it. And I wanted to see how it would interpret to film and black and white film because as I'm shooting and I'm getting ready to make a photograph, I like to have a sense in my head of what I want and how to get there. And these kind of experiments help me get there. Lenses. Like I said, I photographed a ton with my wife with different lenses. The one on the left is a soft focus large format lens that I got. When I make a photograph with that, what am I going to get with it? I have a camera that's a little fold up 9 by 12 camera, and I made the photograph on the right just to see what it would be like. So it's got this kind of timeless, soft blurriness, and yet there's still a sharpness to it. So now I know what I'm going to get, and I can play with that at a later time. Landscape photography. I'm going to say disclaimer here. I'm not a landscape photographer. I never claimed to be. I still approach it as a portrait. So a lot of my photographer buddies, they're Jeep people. So they like to get in their Jeeps, drive out to the wilderness and make landscape photographs. I like these guys. I like hanging out. So I go out with them and I pretend to make good photos. So every once in a while, I get lucky and I get a photograph or two that I like. But again, this kind of translates. This is part of my experimentation because making a photograph at El Mirage is a landscape with a car, looking at the light, looking at how to kind of put things in there. So these do actually influence how I approach things that are used for other things. This was photographed at Alabama Hills. I was walking back at sunrise from another shot that I made. I had a Mamiya RB67 in my hand. And if anybody knows what that is, it's a beast of a medium format camera. And I came over the rise and I saw this guy on the rocks with his dog. And I'm like, I don't know. I think that's cool. Can I get a picture? So I had to meter very quickly, frame, focus, and squeeze off a shot. And somehow this came out. And I like it. It's a landscape photograph, but it's got a subject. It was actually curated into a exhibition for Alabama Hills at one point a couple years ago, and I feel very lucky to have got this moment on film. I just photograph flowers to see what flowers look like on film. Again, the calla lily is photographed by everybody. I just wanted to see what it looked like on black and white film. In this case, this is actually X-ray black and white film because it's way cheaper than other film, and I wanted to see what it would look like. This is in my backyard. The flowers on the right, I was wandering around the Huntington Library down here, and I saw the flowers and I saw the light, and I'm like, can I get something interesting with this? Again, I don't claim to be good at doing these, but every single one of these kind of leads me down a journey and choices when I make other photographs. Details. How do you get details of things? This obviously influences the things that I'm doing with short depths of field or details or things like that. So again, these are just things from the Huntington Library. How do I take a single subject and tell an interesting story on 4x5 film? I liked the feel of this. This is the leg of a bench somewhere, and I just found it interesting, so I made a photograph. So, long story short, I love photography. I'm a camera nerd. I'm a creative who has to create. If I don't, I feel empty and lifeless, and photography is my lifeblood. So the thing and the reason that I choose so often to shoot with film is because there's so many variables and there's so much imperfection. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people hate, and I love. I love the fact that I could use the same camera with 15 different lenses, with 5 or 6 different films, and every single different combination will give me a different look in some way, shape, or form. So, and I also think old cameras are cool looking. So, it appeals to the art director nerd in me. So I have a ridiculous amount of cameras, and I just put a few pictures of my cameras in here for some of the camera nerds, if there are any in the group. This is the deer dwarf that I photograph a lot with my very favorite lens, which is an old Dagor from about 1905. The camera itself is from about 1961, I believe. My old Rolleiflex, I have 3 or 4 Rolleiflexes. I love those as well. My Pentax 67 is actually what I shoot the most with. It's the most flexible medium format camera. You can shoot it almost like a 35 millimeter, and you can get a workout at the same time. And then, of course, the Hasselblad. Everybody knows the Hasselblad. And I shoot a lot with the Hasselblad for the portrait work just because it's so perfect and small. And it doesn't intimidate the subject because many people have seen it and it's well known. So, okay. Did I make it? I think I'm through to the question section.
Perfect.
Thank you all for listening to my fast talking gibberish. I appreciate it. And don't hesitate to ask hard questions because I love them.
Don't forget to unmute everybody. There was a kind of film I used to use years ago, and I forget the name of it, and I bet you know. It's like all black, and it's black or white. There's no gray shades.
It's probably an ortho-based film. Um, it was really typically used for line art when they were creating artwork to be printed. It would be shot in a reproduction camera for line art, so it would keep everything very clean to reproduce on film use to make plates for the printing press. And there was a few, it's still out there. I believe Ilford still makes something like that. And it gives a really interesting look. It's fun to play with.
The name doesn't sound right, but I
Oh,
remember that when you uh, develop it, you had to use like something 17, some developer that had the word 17 in it.
huh.
I tried to look it up and I couldn't
Was
figure it.
was it infrared film?
No, but it was extremely high contrast. It was
Hmm.
black and white, no in between.
No gray tones.
Cannot
Interesting.
remember the name of it, but it was fun to play with.
Huh. That'll be a rabbit hole for me tomorrow. So let me see what I
Good. Yay.
Interesting.
You mentioned about using X-ray film.
Mhm.
Is that high contrast, or what's the advantage of using that? You said about cost.
Cost for
Mhm.
sure. So, it used to be, I haven't bought any in quite some time, but it's actually what I use the most is an X-ray mammography film. There's lots of different films that are X-ray films, but most of them are double-sided, has emulsion on both sides, which makes it very difficult to process because one side will get very scratched up when you're processing it, where
Oh.
mammography, black and white, or X-ray film only has emulsion on one side.
Ah.
And it's reasonable. It's flexible. It's a little bit less exact because it reacts more strongly to UV than traditional film.
Hmm.
So kind of depending on what you're shooting, you have to guesstimate a little bit. Sometimes I shoot at 80 ISO. Other times, if it's super bright, I'll shoot at a higher ISO. And this is just kind of guess and using it as I go. But you can get pretty good results out of it if you know what you're going to get and don't expect it to look exactly like traditional film.
I no longer have my view camera, but if I did, that'd be a good thing to experiment with.
It is. A lot of people do. Like I
Yeah.
said, I haven't bought it in quite some time because I bought a lot of film before the prices went up. So I still have a
Bid
box or
prices.
three in the freezer. So,
Yeah.
but it was
Wow.
a lot less. I mean, large format film is ridiculously expensive anymore,
Wow.
especially in color. But and then 8 by 10 is, it can be depending on the film, anywhere for an 8 by 10 sheet from $15 to $30, depending on
Ooh.
black and white color, who's making
Wow.
it. So it's a commitment. It's a
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank
Great
you.
work.
Thank you. Any
So
other questions?
Tim,
Yeah,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
say that I mean one of the things that I love about your work is I think both the embrace of the imperfection and the blur. And we actually had there was a tiny chat while you were talking about that stuff. Um, and I really do think that everyone right now is really focused on sharp, sharp, sharp. Everything's got to be sharp. And I do think that there's something to be said for, photographs don't always need to be sharp. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll look at like old photographs that we all know, famous photographs, um, and they're not as sharp as I think we all remember them to be, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Okay.
And I think it's only recent, with iPhones and the technology that we have, that everyone's kind of super obsessed with photographs needing to be sharp.
Mhm.
And I really love that that you're okay with that.
Hmm. I kind of have two thoughts on that. The first thing is, camera companies can't keep selling you cameras if you can make the photos that you're happy with the camera you have. So by encouraging this, everything has to be sharper and better and quicker and more perfect. They have an audience that's just constantly revolving. And it makes sense. They've been doing that forever since the beginning of photography. The other thing is, I think as a photographer, you're making a choice of what you want to communicate and what you want your end result to be. If I was shooting a brochure for a car maker, they don't want a blurry photograph. It's got to be perfectly sharp and show every detail and communicate what they need to. And I think that's the difference between commercial and kind of me winging it as a crazy amateur trying to find ways to do things that inspire me. So I think there's place for both. And, the 8 by 10 shot that I did of my sister-in-law, you see that in a big print, and there's portions of that are just so perfectly sharp on film, and yet it's not so sharp that it looks artificial. And I think that's where I struggle with some things. Like I want it to look like the person is there with you. I don't want it to
Mhm.
be so, and I also don't want to encourage the standard that everything has to be this perceived perfect because it's not. We can never live up to that, and it's only going to continue going that way. And I think people in our essence can be beautiful. It's not just how you look, it's how you live, it's what you represent to the world, it's how you present yourself. This artificial standard of beauty is, excuse my friend, it's bullshit. I'm tired of it. I lived in that world so long. We both did in the advertising world. So how can I give something back that maybe gives somebody who hasn't seen themselves in a certain way to see themselves in a way that makes encourages them or makes them see something in themselves that gives them the power to do something they hadn't thought. I don't know. I don't know. I only
Mhm.
hope, that's not my mission in life and it's not my job. But if I can make somebody feel good about themselves, I'm happy. I love that.
Well, I'll just say that, I mean, to your point, there's nothing wrong with a super sharp photograph. Uh, but I also think that there's nothing wrong with a photograph that's possibly out of focus because I think there's something, a lot of times I just find a lot of more emotion
Mm,
in a photograph where there are imperfections
100% agree.
and you allow those imperfections to be part of the photo, you
Yeah.
know.
I'd
I
love
think
to
I think it's
piggyback.
part of capturing the moment.
Sure.
And I mean, the moment isn't going to always. It's not going to be sharp.
Mhm.
It's a
Right.
moment.
And our
Uh,
memories are less sharp as we get older too. And maybe that's part of me as a human getting older, and things start to kind of blur together, and I feel things that way. So it could just be, my kind of perception and trying to share how I see things and experience things also. And a lot of things, in the automotive world, things are blurry because they're moving so quick and you're trying to keep up with it. And even as a human, we can't because our eyes and our brain just doesn't function that quick. So, to me, it's part of the story and why I love the thrill of the chase. You rarely get it, but when you get it, it sure feels good.
Very well done.
I'd
Thank
love
you.
to just add one thing. When I used to teach the kids photography, I used to talk about blur, and I shot the Rodney King riots.
Mm.
Not the LA ones, but the protests, the riots, the immediate riots in San Francisco. And I have a shot I took of a guy taking a shopping cart and slamming it into the bus,
Mm.
but I was a brand new student, a first year student, and I shot everything at like 16 f16 and very sharp.
Mm.
And it looked like he was walking with a shopping cart because there was no movement to it. And I didn't get anything from that event, but I had wished I had, used a slower shutter and
Mm.
created some blur and some movement to it. So anyway,
And that's what you learned. I mean, it's just one more tool in the toolbox. And that's why I love always playing because you find new tools for the toolbox. So, when I go out and I find something, I have to play. I'm like a kid in a candy store. It's like, ooh, I want to use sharp, fast shutter speed this time. How can I do that? And I don't know if I'm going to get anything and I'm not commissioned for it. So there's no pressure. And, if I get 1 out of 300 or, 1 out of 12 on large format film, then I'm super happy and lucky. So
did you
it's
want to
fun.
quickly talk about our photo challenge? Because I think it would be good to get a little explanation for everybody. I'm going to just
Sure.
open this up really quickly. Use my messy screen. There we go. So here's our photo challenge, and I'm going to let our esteemed guest tell us about it.
So this challenge kind of goes to the way of thinking of everything. How can you make a photograph of something inanimate and find a way to tell a story that feels a little bit deeper or challenges the viewer to look at it a little bit closer? Not everybody will, especially in the social media days. People will scroll by without paying attention to almost, excuse me, anything on a 2x2 screen or whatever it is. I chose this photograph because it was on one of my landscape adventures. And I was out with my friends and they were sitting around the fire having a beer at the end of the day. And I don't like beer because I'm weird. And I was frustrated because the whole day I walked around with my stupid huge camera and I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked and there was nothing I saw that inspired me to make a photograph. So I was literally just wandering in the desert in Alabama hills and the sun was just starting to go down. It was just a soft, light day. And I came across this bush and something about it caught my attention. And I just kind of sat there for a minute and I just looked. It just made me stop and look. And I'm like, if it makes me want to stop and look, maybe other people will be curious about it. So I went and got my Hasselblad and I sat down and I rushed before the sun completely went away and I made this snapshot. And I spent a lot of time with it. And actually, I've had it in a couple of shows and people tend to react to it and they see different things for different reasons. For me, I see this because it's like it's death, but it's also life. It's this bush is obviously completely dead, and yet it's still fighting. There's still something there it's like, hey, I'm still here. I'm not going away. And yet there's life all around it, and there's things happening, and it's just kind of in this place of, I don't know, nothingness. So, the challenge is, and it doesn't matter what you photograph, but I think the hard part is finding something to photograph and looking beyond just that subject and finding a way to interact and engage that and something that you want to see again or you want to look at again and it doesn't immediately give you an answer.
So I'm going to post that on Facebook. And as people post, Scott, Tim, please feel free to make comments or, respond.
Sure. And I'll say it again, just remember there's no wrong answer and there's no failure. It's all just something to play with and see if you find something that inspires you.
Awesome. I
Awesome.
see
Thank
you
you.
have that same image printed on your wall.
Yes, I think it is up. It is. Yeah, it's up on the wall. I didn't plan that, either one of them. Those are just up there all the time. You can tell I like them, but yeah.
Your house looks very cool, I can tell.
It's strategically placed. You can only see what you, you need to see. The rest of it's a disaster right now, but yeah, whole different story.
Does anyone else have anything, comments or anything?
Okay, I've got one more comment.
Sure.
It's not photo related, so I wanted to save it to the end. Um, the I noticed on the cars, I never noticed this before, but on the cars, there would be like a number, like 242,
Mhm.
and then like a letter B or C or something like that. And I wanted to know if there's any um, significance or relevance. Is the letter like a class or?
So it would depend. So, back in the day, if you're at El Mirage, hot rodding was huge. There could be 200 hot rods out on the dry lake bed. And to be able to keep track of them and time them, they had to know which car was which. So they would literally handwrite, sometimes in shoe polish, a number on the car, and it kind of became tradition. And then on top of that, they had to keep track, that's a good guess, of the class. So the class actually became part of that as well. Now today, a lot of people just make up a letter and a number just because it makes them happy, which is fine. But that's where it all came from.
Okay. Okay.
I just wanted to say this, Virginia. I'm talking on my cell phone now.
Hello, Virginia.
Hi. Yeah, I really liked her portraiture a whole lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, I liked her car pictures too, but the portraiture was fabulous. Yeah, and you almost make me want to shoot film again. But I always tell people I don't have enough years left of life to take the time to become a film photographer again, but it was my passion at one time, and I also love photographing people. So thank you for the inspiration. I also wanted to just tell the group if anybody is planning on coming to Santa Cruz at the Santa Cruz Art League on Broadway, there's a photography show opening tomorrow and it'll be up through February 25th, I believe. The gallery is open from Wednesdays through Sundays, 12 to 5. And the theme of the show is movement. And it's called Movement, a Motion in Time, or a Moment in Time. And it's curated by Devi Pride, who is a local studio photographer. And yeah, the opening is I mean, not the opening, it starts tomorrow, but it'll be up for a month. And the reception, if anybody wants to make it for that, is February 7th in the evening. So that's what's going on in Santa Cruz.
Thank you for telling us.
Sure.
And by the way, you could probably just for fun take a college class at community college and start doing film if if the school still has a dark room.
Yeah,
If I can make a little comment.
they have
So
a
go
free
ahead.
one at Cabrillo right now. They're offering free darkroom classes. But yeah, so maybe this summer I'll do one.
Hey, good for you.
Now, there is something magical in film that I love for this, but the flip side of that is, and this is something I taught a class at Azusa Pacific commercial photography. And of course, I came in there and they love my film cameras. And their first question is, do we have to shoot film? And my answer is always no. It's just a tool. You know, the beautiful thing about digital, especially when you're trying to figure out a way to do something, is it's quick. You can shoot a lot of things just to experiment. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do a test shooting digital and then I'll go back and reshoot it using film, knowing what's going to be different in the process. But you know, it's not one is better than the other. It's one allows me the tools to share what I see in a way that inspires me, and it doesn't make it any better or any worse. It's just a different way to do it. So use what inspires you and what you have. I've seen amazing portraits done on a cell phone that I'm jealous of, but yeah, don't feel pigeonholed or like you have to do something.
One thing I noticed about your black and whites was the softness. Incredible. I know you can adjust that in a dark room with exposure and development, but yours have a particular softness to them that I think film lends itself to quite nicely. So compliment you on that also.
Yeah, usually the larger the format, the smoother that backdrop will be. The depth of field and the bokeh is very creamy on the larger stuff. So the funny thing is it's not really soft, but there's a look to the film and the old lenses. The old lenses are uncoated. So
Yeah,
there's a lot
yeah,
less contrast, and I like
yeah,
old uncoated glass because it'll flare in a heartbeat, but you know
yeah.
that sometimes I love flare, but
Yeah.
there's a look to it that I absolutely adore that modern lenses are still trying to force everything to be perfect and high contrast and super sharp. And again, nothing wrong with that. It's just not what I'm personally inspired by.
A lot of stuff is overly sharp these days too. So
Hmm.
it's nice to see the old stuff.
Hmm.
Great stuff again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for putting up with this and listening to my long talking. I'm going to need a week of not talking to recover, but I appreciate you taking the time and listening.
Well,
Great.
thank you so much. Your work is just so expansive, and thank you for sharing so much.
My pleasure.
I
I
thought
like
you were
talking about photography.
I thought you were going to be so shy, and you were amazing.
You know, I will be as soon as we hang up this call. I'm going to go crawl in a corner and yeah.
You know, the thing I miss the most about photography, film photography, is the print. Because
Hmm.
I used to teach and work with high school kids in a dark room, and the print is just, it's embedded, it's in the gelatin. So that's the only thing I really, really miss is the beauty of the print when you make this great negative.
To me, a photograph is not complete until it's in print form.
Yeah.
I feel like you experience it completely differently than you do on a screen.
Absolutely.
Again, neither right or wrong, just different
Right.
experience.
Just different. Yes. Yeah. And thank you.
My
I think
pleasure.
you learn a lot when you print, because when you print, it just becomes something completely different than on a screen. You
Mhm.
see all the flaws when you print. On the screen, you can miss some of the flaws.
Mhm.
All
Well, I
right.
look forward to seeing what you do with the challenge. I think it will be fun. And honestly, I like to learn from other people. So please forgive me if I steal ideas from work that you guys post. Get inspired, and you never know. A good idea comes from anyone, anywhere, and any place. So please,
So,
fun.
And I'll send you the recording tomorrow, Tim.
Okay, thank you.
You're
how do
welcome.
you participate in this challenge? I'm new to your group,
Oh,
so I
so
don't know anything about that.
are you on Facebook?
Yeah.
Great. So just
But
search.
I'm actually thinking about leaving Facebook, but I am still on it.
You could just keep the Fairfax Photo Club page and don't post anything else if you want.
Yeah.
So if you
Okay.
want to join, it's the Fairfax Photo Club. Just do a search, and there's a couple of questions you have to answer, and then it lets you right in.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll post the challenge tomorrow. I'm going to bed right now. um, and if you want to put your website in the chat, Tim, I think that would be really helpful too.
Let me do that.
And I'm gonna I can leave this open if you all want to I'm gonna hit